Okay, hello everyone again. My name is Amy Salazar. I'm an assistant professor at Washington State University in Vancouver, and I am part of the executive leadership team for the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni in Higher Ed. Thanks for joining us for our web series today. Just a reminder, or if you haven't been a part of any of our webinars yet, we do record the webinars and put them on the NRC FAHE website. You can see the link here on the slide. Or if some of you are on the phone or don't have screens, it's www.nrc.fahe.org. So before we get started with today's webinar, I just want to do a quick mention of our upcoming future webinars. So we have a webinar coming up on Wednesday, March 24th from noon to 1 Pacific time. And the presenter will be Dr. Royelle Johnson, who's an assistant professor and research associate at Penn State University. And he'll be giving a presentation entitled Preparing Youth in Foster Care for College through an Early Outreach Program. So he'll talk about this early outreach program and some of the cross-sector collaboration that took as part of that effort, as well as some evaluation findings that'll be presented. And then our April webinar, we also have that one scheduled, is for Wednesday, April 21st from noon to 1 Pacific time. And the presenters will be Dr. Jennifer Geiger from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and Dr. Nathaniel Oppich from University of Connecticut. And more information will be available about their webinar soon. So for today, how our webinar will work is essentially our presenters will present for about 35-40 minutes or so about what they'll be talking with us about today. And then we'll have about 10-15 minutes at the end for Q&A time. So for Q&A, as we go through the webinar today, if any questions come up for you, you can go ahead and type them in the chat box at any time. But I'll hold all those questions and wait, and when we get to the end of the presentation, I will read those questions out to our presenters. So please feel free to enter those at any time. Okay, so today we have a presentation entitled Success and Educational Advancement of Former Youth in Foster Care, a qualitative inquiry related to social work and advanced degree attainment. And our two presenters are Dr. Sabrina Jackson. She's an assistant professor and MSW program director at the University of Alabama School of Social Work. And our second presenter is Dr. Toni Naccarato. She's an associate professor at Cal State University East Bay in the Department of Social Work. So I will hand it over to the both of you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Let me share the screen. And hi, everyone. This is Sabrina. All righty, Toni, you want to get us started?
Sure. Good morning, or I guess good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be here. Glad to see all of you are here with us. Hopefully that means you're all healthy and happy and living this, getting through all that we're getting through. So it's good to see everyone and good to see so many folks who I actually know. So that means a couple of things. It means I'm getting older, which I'm not sure I'm so happy about, but it also means that I have great colleagues that are interested in my topic of interest, which is youth in foster care. And today we're going to kind of talk about youth in foster care related to education. And we're going to get started with some introductions. And thank you, Sabrina. She moved the slide and I didn't have to say, move the slide. Thank you. Very nice. Anyway, as Amy introduced me, she said, yes, indeed, I am an associate professor at Cal State East Bay in the Department of Social Work. I've been there now for about 5 years. And just wanted to give you a little brief intro about who I am. I have my lived experiences. I grew up in foster care in upstate New York. And that was back, I entered into foster care in the late 70s and then was in through the early 80s. And my foster care experience is very different from, every person's foster care experience is different from another person's experience, but I will also say that my experience occurred prior to the current legislation. So there was no independent living skills program. There were no transitional living services. There were no supports. There was no encouragement to go on to college or even to finish high school. It was just basically just living day by day, and just hopefully to be able to stay in a placement longer than just a couple of months was kind of looked at as successful. So things have changed, thankfully, very much. So I also have practice experience. I worked for about 10 years in Santa Clara County Department of Family and Children's Services, which is in San Jose, California, where the headquarters is. And I worked in the Adolescent Services Unit. So I was working with folks, young people who basically most of them were pregnant and or parenting. And so my caseload was usually older youth who are about to leave the child welfare system on their 18th birthday, in some cases their 19th. So I did that for, like I said, about 10 years. And that kind of fed into my frustration about what I was seeing related to the foster care system and youth who are aging out. Because now I was the one kind of working through their case and trying to figure out what they're going to do in adulthood. And again, this was still in the early 90s, early to mid 90s. And again, services really, they were lacking. We needed a lot more help for these youth, which then led me into pursuing my doctorate at Berkeley in social work related to youth and foster care. So it's been pretty tight in terms of my own experience, and then what I've been doing now as a professional in terms of academic and my looking at education, employment, and health related to foster youth. So I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed and wonderful colleague, Dr. Sabrina Jackson, who will talk a little bit, tell us about her. Good morning, or good afternoon, Sabrina.
Thanks so much, Tony. Again, just excited to be here today with the group. As Tony shared, see some familiar faces or names. And so it's good to be in this space to have this type of conversation. I'm at the University of Alabama School of Social Work, as Amy has already shared, as an assistant professor, but also MSW program director there. I've been at the university for about 5 years now, so going into my 6th year. And my experience and interest with this work, I'm a first generation college student. And so for me, education really has been the difference maker. And so my interest in education for particularly for foster youth, because many of them are first gen college students. And so my interest with the population is because of that connection. And so I've practiced for over 20 years in the field. And of course, now as a tenure track professor, also doing research in the area. And so just really excited about this work that Tony and I have started to do, and look forward to sharing a little bit more with you here today.
So we'll start with kind of talking about the literature, which I'm certain by looking at the participant list that many of us are familiar with. And of course, most of us understand the lasting benefits related to having education, but also a college degree. And the way that I looked at it in most of my work in terms of education attainment is I've looked at it from kind of the lens of more of an economic, a human capital perspective when I look at the work that I did in my dissertation and then some of the work that I did after. And it really does show that the level of education does impact one's ability to earn an income, the ability to pursue the interests that they would like, healthcare, keeping people healthier. So this is all what we've seen when we're talking about folks obtaining their college education or a college degree. We also know in the current climate that sometimes now undergraduate degree isn't enough. We need to kind of look more towards graduate degrees and more higher education, not leaving other alternatives behind, such as vocation, etc. But most of my work has looked at education as it's defined in more of the higher education sphere. So then we look at just general facts. And again, we know that many more youth in foster care want to go to college than actually do. And that is complicated. And Sabrina and I intend to figure out, why that is, as many of us on this Zoom call have looked at. What helps youth get to college? What's the barriers? What are the challenges? And again, we see that many more youth have this thought or desire to go to college than actually those who finish. And so those numbers really we need to look at and figure out how to help this. Other studies have focused very much on the challenges and obstacles, as Gilliam and all have done. And again, what do these youth need to propel them into going on to higher education? And again, very concrete responses sometimes from the data that indicate support's a big one, finances is a big one, not even knowing how to begin the process is a big one, which is why programs like Sabrina at University of Alabama, as college readiness programs, if you will, such as Guardian Scholars, such as Renaissance Scholar programs, why they're so important to being able to help these young people navigate just even, how to get a textbook, where they're going to be during holidays, where they're going to live. And those kinds of challenges are now even more so with COVID, as we can tell, as people become more isolated, as people become more unable to use technology and be able to get through their classes. So, it's not, I'm sorry, Sabrina, you have to change it, thanks. Okay, again, other data has indicated related to educational statistics just go on to show us that youth in the general population definitely have an advantage related to going on and obtaining a post-secondary education. And again, we aim, I think all of us on this call aim to level that playing field a bit, because we know that these youth can do it and it's best and want to do it. So how do we get them through the process? Let's see, what else can I say here? We know that more work needs to be done. We know that barriers exist. And one of the things that Sabrina and I were talking about when we first met several years ago, I think it was at a special interest group related to foster youth and education. And we happened to be sitting next to each other and kind of talking to each other about what we were doing and who we were. And we started talking about this project and the gap that needs to be filled related to youth going on and becoming successful in their advanced college degrees. And then we also started to think about our own experiences in our academic posts, as well as our practice and lived experience that, kind of shows that youth, many of the youth that I have in my classrooms or mentor from college readiness programs want to go into social work. And Sabrina had also had that. I'm not going I'll let her tell you about her experiences related to the variables, but I will say only that we knew that there was something there, that youth who grew up in foster care, absolutely many youth had a desire to go into the helping profession and more specifically social work. So we thought, okay, so why not design a study or think about a study that maybe then we'll be able to figure out why that is. And so that last bullet point under literature, that's kind of the starting point. We knew that adults were pursuing their degrees in social work. We wanted to know why and what they were thinking. And so that kind of is where we're at right now today. Okay, Sabrina.
Thanks, Shoni. And I'll just add, as we prepare to start to talk about the study, just from your last statement in terms of our experiences with young people who end up pursuing a degree in social work. And that has been my experience as well. Like you said, really anecdotally, because there's not a lot in the literature, but just from my experience, even with the pre-college program that I started many years ago, it's called the National Social Work Enrichment Program, NSEP, but we even focused on that area because we had so many youth that were interested in pursuing a career in social work and wanted to learn more about the profession beyond their child welfare experience. they were interested in the helping profession. So we've seen, even from the pre-college program, many youth move on into undergraduate programs and even go on to master's programs in social work as well. And so this study is an opportunity and was an opportunity for us to really talk to others who've had lived foster care experience, but also chose to pursue a master's degree and or a PhD in the profession.
Okay. And I think just to continue, looking at the objectives, again, I think just giving voice and kind of changing the narrative that has typically been very negative around youth obtaining not only higher education, but high school diplomas in the first place was seen as a triumph, if you will. And we know that that's just not okay. It's not enough for the world that we live in. And so, how do we move from kind of these negative outcomes to more positive trajectory related to what we know that the youth want? Because if you ask them, they'll tell you they want to go to college. And so now it's our job, our role is, as I believe, as citizens, is to make that dream come true. And I'm living proof that if you continue, that your life can change. Because pretty much when I was growing up, I think that my option was incarceration, was death. There was a lot of negative lurking around the corner unless I made some changes and fulfilled some sort of way to take care of myself and make a living. So it becomes very pragmatic as well. And again, just changing that narrative. Yeah. Sabrina?
I was just going to add to that, Tony. I think one of the things too, I not long ago, even before, as Tony and I were having this conversation, kind of at the same time, shortly after I met Tony for the first time, and we talked about wanting to change the narrative and add additional information to the literature. I was in a conversation with someone at the federal level who was talking about just the need to understand those youth who had lived experience, how do they make it through? And he was really interested in learning, what happened? How did they get to the point from being in the system to getting a college degree, and using that information from those youth, using those voices to help inform practice and policy. And he talked about just his frustration. He had been in, worked in the system, and he just talked about his frustration of just, constantly reading the literature about all of the negative. Again, and it's important for us to identify those things and to talk about those things. But he also, is looking in an effort to try to find solutions to these challenges, practice solutions and policy solutions, wanted to hear more from those who had lived experiences, but also were able to move through college. And so, that became really important to me and really kind of fueled my desire as well to want to do this study. So I'll share a little bit in terms of our methodology and just where we are. I'll also go ahead and say we're still very much in this process with the study. Our sample has been adults who, like we've mentioned before, who've had lived foster care experience. And we thought it was also important to use the term care leavers as well. Tony and I and others on this call have had some international experiences or participated with our colleagues internationally who are also trying to do this work. And so we wanted to make sure that we acknowledge the term care leavers that our international colleagues use when referring to this population. We chose participants who had completed a minimum of an MSW and or had a PhD in social work or related fields. And Tony alluded a little bit earlier, kind of why we chose social work. And again, for both of us, we're both professional social workers. This is the population that we know well and have built some relationships and contacts, but also because we've seen, like we've said before, that there are people who go into this field who've had lived experience. And so for us, this was a natural place to start with the sample for this very exploratory study. And what Tony and I did just in our conversation, we made a decision to generate just an initial list of prospective participants based upon our practice experience, other kinds of relationships we have, our research experience. We wanted to generate an initial list of people who fit the study criteria that we could reach out to. We then used a snowball sampling technique. So as we interviewed participants, our very last question in the interview was, do you know of another person that would be interested, who has lived experience, has an MSW and or PhD or related area that would be interested? And so we did obtain some participants in the study from participants that we interviewed. And so we were really excited about that. And those that we interviewed were really interested in helping us to identify other folk who could help add to this discussion and conversation. So that was something that we were really excited to hear, and we're pleased as well. We contacted those, all of the potential participants via email and or phone, depending on how we had relationships or what kind of contact information we had. That's how we reached out to folk initially with our standard kind of language that we share with everyone. And we use DocuSign because of being in this virtual space and trying to use technology. We use DocuSign as a tool for us to get informed consents signed and completed. And of course, everyone received a electronic copy of that informed consent as well. So in terms of our data collection process, we used a semi-structured interview based upon a protocol that Tony and I worked together to create. One of the things that we think was unique about what we're doing, and I say what we're doing because we're still very much in this process. We actually have one more interview that's scheduled for this week. But we believe that we're reaching and have reached a point of saturation, but we wanted to complete this last interview, which was a referral from another participant. But one of the things that was unique about this process for us is that we chose to do the interviews together. Instead of Tony kind of doing a set of interviews, me doing a set, we chose to come together, which of course, we're in different time zones. Tony is on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast. But we were able to work that out in a way that we were able to co-facilitate those interviews. And we essentially just decided to separate the areas. There were 4 areas on our survey. Of course, demographics, and you see there, we had 15 questions in that area. We had foster care experience questions that we asked, that were 14 of those questions. Education experiences, which is because that's the meat or the heart of the study. We had 22 questions. And then we had a section related to policy, practice, and research recommendations, which was 8 questions. And we made the decision in terms of who would lead the interview based upon the relationship with the particular participant. Because we recognize the fact that the foster care experience questions and even the education experience questions, some of the questions were really very personal, very sensitive. And so we were trying to be mindful and really being aware of that. And so we made decisions that those folk that we had relationships with, we would ask those more sensitive questions. And that seemed to flow really well. And so we kind of rotated in that sense. As we're using today, we use Zoom as a video conferencing tool. And that worked out really well too, because we were able to record all of the interviews. Participants were comfortable with that. And we were able to get, from that audio, get the interviews professionally transcribed. And the interviews, average time was about 90 minutes, so about 1.5 hours. We did have some that were a little bit shorter, and we had a few that went even longer than that. But the average amount of time was 90 minutes for the interviews. Tony, anything you want to add about the data collection before I move on?
I think, no, I think that's good. Thank you.
And so just a little bit about the demographics, what we wanted to do today, so far we've done 14 interviews, but we've transcribed or had transcribed and done some initial analysis of 7 of those. And so today what we're talking about and want to share with you is information on 7 of those interviews. Like I said before, we have 7 others that are being transcribed and 1 more interview to be completed. So we'll have a total of 15 once we wrap up the study. But of the 7 that we want to share with you today, 5 of those were female and 2 were male. Most of the participants were African-American. We had 1 biracial participant. The age ranged from 25 to 44. In terms of their relationship status, the majority were married. 4 of the 7 were married. 2 were single, and 1 stated that their relationship status was just, I'm in a relationship. So we decided to just leave it there. In terms of children, most of the participants of this 7 had 2 children. We had 1 person that interviewed, his wife was pregnant, about 4.5 months pregnant. So he said he had 1.5 children. And we had 1 with 3 children and another participant that did not have any children. In terms of the demographics of this 7, all of them had a high school diploma. The majority did not attend community college. We had 2 that graduated from community college and 1 that attended but did not graduate. In terms of their graduate education, the majority of them had their master's only. Of this 7, 5 of them had their master's only. We had 1 person of the 7 that had a master's and PhD. And then 1 of the 7 that we're talking about today also had a master's and a DSW. And as we think about the demographics of the other 7 that we're in the process of reviewing now, we have 5 that are masters only and 2 that have their master's and PhD. And so just kind of giving you a sense of the remaining participants. And we'll learn, like I said, this week about the 15th person as well, but giving you a sense of the demographics of the study participants. In terms of data analysis, we're using NVivo 12 as a tool to assist with that. And we're using Braun and Clark's process to do thematic analysis. And I know most on this call are really familiar with qualitative research and what that process entails, and knowing that it's a really iterative, if I can get the word out, and very reflective process. So we've been spending quite a bit of time initially with this first 7, of course, becoming very familiar with the data itself, thinking about initial coding and searching for themes and revising those themes and starting to name that. And finally, as we get through, we'll of course generate reports and that piece, but we're very much in the middle of this process, kind of going back and forth. But we felt like we were at a place, even today with the presentation, that there's some things that we feel like we can share, and we look forward to getting your thoughts about what we're seeing so far. And so we're going to share just a little bit, some information from each of the areas, and then we'll have some time for discussion and questions. So Tony? Okay.
Thanks, Sabrina. So I'm going to talk about, we had a section on foster care experiences, and that was, that had 14 questions associated with it. And we chose to ask this question and to highlight the responses from 4 participants. And the question being, what do you believe is most important to understand in supporting foster youth and foster children? And so again, I'm going to read these because some folks may be on the phone and may not have access to the actual narrative part. So participant number 8 responded to the question about what they believed is most important to understanding and supporting foster youth and foster children as, I think it's most important to understand that they have come with the extra baggage of kind of having to have dealt with some difficult situations that brought them into care. But they face a lot of the normal barriers, and they experience a lot of the normal triumphs that people not in that population also experience. And sometimes I think that people look at them or look at us like we're other. Participant number 6 responded to the question related to understanding and supporting youth and foster children as, I think that it's important that we know that they are more than a label. They're more than a number. Their voices matter, and in order for us to really do the work that we claim that we're doing, we have to listen. And I really think that that's important, the most important thing. So you still have, trauma after trauma after trauma because nobody's listening. So to move on to this question, Again, same question in terms of supporting foster youth and foster children. Participant number 3 had to say, I think the most important thing is establishing consistent support. When I was in foster care for the longest time, my support system was my oldest brother. It wasn't until probably I got to college, I actually started to have to search for another support system, meaning my brother was the most consistent person in my life. Wherever I lived, wherever I was, he was there with me until I went to college. Once I went to college, it transferred to a mentor father figure, and he became that next consistent supportive person in my life. Participant number 5 had to say, I think the most important thing that people need to realize is that foster children, whether they're adults or they grew up, they always want to belong to something, or they always want to feel like they're part of something, that somebody wants them. So that's kind of gives you a kind of 4 ideas about how the participants responded to this whole idea of what they felt was needed to be provided to foster youth and foster children in terms of support. So the next, go ahead. Yep.
I was going to say, if we can, even as we go back to the previous slide with the initial question here, one of the things that comes to mind is, as Tony and I are starting to look at potential themes coming up, even from this 7, not surprisingly, support is something that this group is saying is really critical. But I also thought it was important to think about participant 8 and participant 6, just kind of talking about how they're treated and the impact of how youth with foster care experience are treated, by others, and how other folk look at them. And we look forward to kind of digging in a little deeper with that notion as well.
Great. All right. Okay, so then we had the third section was related to education. And there's 22 questions associated with this area. And one of the questions that we chose to highlight was, what kept you going, especially when times got tough? And again, just to bring it back around, this is related to their educational experience. And so participant number 10, I think, school was a place that I naturally did well, right? It was a place I got praise and positive feedback. And I think I earned that. So that made school an attractive feature. I know, sometimes I tell people to this day, I don't know. Maybe I ended up, other than Dr. pushing me hard, that maybe being a professor was a way for me to stay in school forever. So I never had to leave. And again, I will just remind folks that the study sample were folks who were now adults who had obtained their master's or their master's and or doctorate in social work, and their doctorate being something, a degree related to social work, just to bring it back. So that's, there's an assumption there. And participant 3, again, what they thought related to how they handled tough times. I think for a long time, school, I think going to college gave me a purpose, a goal to achieve. And I think the relationships with the people I built also helped with that. I felt like at college, I really reached. I guess if you could define what's normal, I felt like I was reaching a point. Being a foster kid didn't matter. I'm in school. I'm excelling in school. I'm meeting amazing people. Like, whether or not I was a foster child and what happened then, and at that time, it doesn't even matter anymore. Okay. And 2 more participants with the question related to when times got tough. Participant number 7. It was really just the fact that I kept telling myself, look, you ain't doing all this for nothing. You have people looking at you. I guess I was thinking about my reputation. I was thinking about myself, I was thinking about, I didn't want to be another statistic. I didn't want to be a failure. That was part of my drive. Like, I got to make this shake. I got to do it. And then I just kept, hearing people say, you're investing in your future. You're investing in your future. Participant number 8 had to say, and so even when I struggled, even when I got lazy, even I got like very disheartened, there was always kind of that voice in the back of my head about, what it would look like if I was successful. What would it mean to the program, to myself? And so that kind of was like the driving force. Sabrina, did you want to comment?
No comment. I'll go ahead and talk about, share a couple of the policy, practice, and research recommendations so that we can then have some discussion about it as I look at the time. And so the policy, practice, and research recommendations section had 8 questions in it. And so just for our purpose today, we wanted to highlight one of those questions. What do you think youth need to be successful in college? And participant 6 shared they need housing stability. When they're on these campuses and a break occurs, they have to leave. Where are they going to go? So I think that housing would be probably the first thing. Transportation, access to medical care, the basic things that everybody in a traditional family would already have. Participant 7 shared, of course they need a support system, a safety net, somebody that's consistent with them. I'm going back to that adult, that consistent adult that's like a mentor, a role model. That's huge. And they also need a car. I mean, I don't think people realize how important that is. They need a car so that they don't feel like they're relying on everybody. Like that's a big one. Participant 5 said to that same question, what do you think youth need to be successful in college? Support is the biggest thing. They need to be monitored through school. They have to have somebody to call them. They have to have somewhere to go during the holidays. They have to have somebody to come up there to check on them to make sure they're okay. They have to have somebody that they think that care about them. Like that's the biggest thing. It's not about them going to class every day. It's just having somebody there to say, hey, I need you to go to class and that kind of thing. And finally, participant 1 said, I would say a guidance counselor. It's someone that really supports them through the process and just additional resources. Like for me, I didn't have a mom and dad that I could go to when I was hungry or didn't have money for gas. I had to decide. It was either gas or eating lunch. When your stomach is growling, it's hard to focus and concentrate. Or when you're thinking about your bank account is in the negative, I mean, that plays a toll on your mental health and your ability to focus. Really in class because of all of these other factors going on. And so those were just a few of the quotes from this particular area. And so as we talk about and think about limitations, just from what we're seeing now, and like I said, we're still in the very beginning phases of looking at the data and really thinking about themes that are bubbling up. But I'm sure as we did, you're starting to hear some of those themes, even just from the questions. But we think about, one of the limitations is that this is a sample that's only of youth with lived experience or adults with lived experience who have attained a degree in social work. And so other disciplines are excluded. The sample size, we think about sample size, but again, we believe we've reached a point of saturation as we're, hearing some of the same things from those that we've been interviewing. And we also wanted to note, and I think I mentioned this before, that the sample is only people in the US. And so we didn't have any opportunities or sought opportunities to interview anyone with international experience. And of course, anytime you're doing qualitative studies and you're doing analysis, we're constantly thinking about our own bias and really thinking about ways to check that as we're doing this process. We also recognize that one of the potential limitations of the study could be the interview process in terms of the amount of time that it took to answer questions. I mentioned before that the interviews lasted about 90 minutes and some of them were longer than that. And so we realized that sometimes either the interviewers or the interviewees or participants, there could be some fatigue involved in that. We also recognize, we were talking about really sensitive information, and there were times that we had to take breaks, and so we're mindful of those limitations as we're moving forward in data analysis. But we do want to have some time for discussion, and so Tony, do you want to kind of share this information, and then we can open it up for conversation with those that are in attendance?
Sure. Just as we've said, Sabrina said previously, is that, yeah, like we're still up in the middle of this project. We have a while to go. We have some, the analysis to continue. And then of course the dissemination of our manuscripts and other presentations. And so, by the way, thanks for letting us be here today and expressing our work to you all. We really appreciate that opportunity. What we have as we move forward is we have our last interview next week. And so we're looking forward to that. We also, again, as we've stated, are going to continue our data analysis. We have analyzed 7 of the transcription files, and we'll have 7 more that are ready to go with one, as I said, the interview scheduled for next week or this week. And then just getting the products out, just spreading the word that we think is very important. One of the caveats that I learned from this study, as the interviewer listening to what the respondents had to say, which kept me going, because as many of you know, this work with youth in foster care and it's extremely, it's very difficult and challenging and labor intensive, and all that goes into it. And also, you really need to be someone who really believes in how to move and serve this population. And as you heard from my own narrative, it's very, very important to me. And so how we, what I really liked was that the participants of the study also said that they really were kind of nervous about having this kind of interview go on with their experience, but that afterwards there was, I remember at least 4 folks said this, that they were really happy someone was choosing to do this work, that they wanted folks to understand why they chose the helping profession. And then, and also people were interested in that we move this work beyond just social work. And I think that's Sabrina and I agree that perhaps we'll start with folks who have left the system and decided to get into professions such as social work, but next study, look at it more broadly and to see how others kind of came to think about their careers and what they chose. Yeah. So, yeah.
And I'll just say too, Tony, that we're so grateful. I don't know if we said it in the very beginning, but of course, as we interviewed participants, we were so grateful that those who participated in the study were willing to share and willing to take the time to talk to us about their experiences in these areas. And so we'll be in this process even of checking back in with them and hearing just kind of their thoughts about the data. But we wanted to have this opportunity, and grateful for NRC and Amy and the group giving us an opportunity to at least start the conversation and share where we are in the process so far. And so I think based upon time, we'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments or thoughts about what we have so far. And if not here, Tony and I would love to hear from you. We'll share the PowerPoint, and you can reach us by email. We'd love to hear any thoughts that you have as we're in this process of doing our data analysis. And again, hopefully share more detailed information to come.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sabrina and Tony. I really appreciate your presentation. So we'll open it up for questions now. Please take a second, go ahead and type in any questions that you have, and you can send them directly to me or to the group, either one, and I will read those out as we go. Okay, so one question we have is will you engage in member checking?
That was, yes. I think I was alluding to that at the end, that one of the things that we want to do is, and we shared with the participants, that we will circle back around to them as we start to, we wanted to get the full 14 interviews transcribed and that process done, and then circle back to do some member checking. Tony, anything else you want to add to that?
No, it's a very important part of this process. We absolutely want to go back and check in with the folks who we had the privilege of talking with about this experience, to make sure that we're capturing it in the way that they anticipated us, but absolutely.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why we didn't today, we didn't share or give names in terms of themes and that piece, is because we do know that it's important to do that member checking, before we label the theme. So today we wanted to just kind of share some of the information that we're starting to get kind of on the front end of the process.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, it was interesting that so few of your participants went to community college. How do you think your findings may have differed had you had more participants with community college experience?
I would say that that surprised us as well, but really what surprised us was how many of them had high school diplomas. And so instead of GEDs, because much of the literature, prior literature has this idea or tells you that many of them, including, by the way, myself, I have a GED, not a high school diploma. So I think we're surprised by a couple of those things. Sabrina, so I guess what I'm saying is I don't have an answer to that, but yes, we were surprised.
Yeah, and similar, Tony, I don't know how it would be different, but it'll be interesting to see as we do the analysis of the 7 that remain and well, eventually 8 that remain to see, if there are any more in the remaining of the sample that did have that community college experience, because I know we do, oftentimes we're encouraging youth to start at community colleges and then go on to 4-year colleges. And so that raises in our sample, if we find that the majority of that group went straight to 4-year, then we do need to, kind of think about that messaging and whether or not, that is the right fit for all youth, I think is a question that we'll have to ask ourselves. Or should it just be more individualized, kind of service? But great question. So, and I made a note about that so we can make sure we pay attention to that.
Thanks. I just want to point, there are another question or two, but I wanted to just point out that there are a few in the comment or in the chat. There are also just some appreciations that I want to make sure, Sabrina and Tony, that you all mention or that you all notice. I won't read those out since they aren't questions, but just wanted to point those out. So another question is, how do you think these experiences that you share related to these students deciding to become social workers specifically?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that question, Amy.
Sure. How do you think these experiences that you shared related to these students deciding to become social workers specifically?
Okay. I'll jump in on that, Sabrina. I can tell you why I became a social worker and I was a person in care, and that's because I very much hated my social worker. They didn't do anything good for me. I wanted to change the system. And I think there are some of those folks like myself that exist. I also think there are those who had a positive experience. And but it did shape me because I actually had interactions with social workers in the first place. I can talk to many of my colleagues and friends that are not involved in foster care or involved in social work at all, who don't know what foster care is. So just having the mere experience of having a social worker introduced me to a profession that many may not know exists. So that's how I'd answer it from a personal perspective. Sabrina?
And I'll say, in terms of the data that we have so far, we did ask that question. We didn't share it today because, we just had a hard time trying to figure out, what to share with this group. But we did ask that question of the participants, of their community college major. We asked them about their, as an undergrad, what their major was, why they chose that major. We asked them if they had their master's and of course, with their master's, what was their major? Why did they choose that major? And so that is a question that we'll be able to answer in terms of our data. We'll be able to answer that question, in more detail as we continue to do the analysis. But that is a question we ask and was important to this particular study. I don't know if we have time to share just a little bit in terms of similar to what Tony shared in terms of her professional experience. From the interviews, as I think back and remember the data, similar to Tony's experience, either the person had a horrible social worker and wanted to do something different. I recall another participant saying they had a wonderful social worker that made all the difference, and they wanted to also make that difference. I recall another participant talking about, just again, kind of stumbling into social work, from classroom experience on the campus, and a teacher or professor told them about social work. They were majoring in something else, and someone else told them about social work. So they weren't even thinking about their lived experience in terms of why they moved into it. So just as I'm thinking about that particular question, the responses are really varied in terms of why they chose, but we'll definitely take a deeper dive into that question. But we just didn't think to share that one today among some of the other things that we wanted to share with you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is, I'm curious about what you think the implications are for the child welfare agencies and how they might improve their training and supervision to better support those with lived experience.
Oh, that's a great question. Wow, I think one of the things that stands out to me from the foster care experiences quotes that we shared with you is that a number of the participants talked about being treated like other, like there was something that was different about them, beyond, the fact that they had that lived experience. And so I think a lot of that comes from how they've been treated, beginning with their social workers. And so I think in terms of training, helping those who work, those independent living social workers to understand that these are still, particularly I remember some of the participants talking about their teenage years and how they were treated so differently than quote unquote normal teenagers, and how that made them feel. And so what immediately comes to mind to me is training around that kind of just what's normal in terms of development for teenagers, and then understanding the impact of trauma, which is another question that we had as well, talked about the impact of trauma on their educational experience and even their experience in foster care. And so training around helping workers to understand that as they're working with the population. But Tony, what would you share in terms of implications for practice or policy?
Well, one thing before I kind of say my response to that is also in part 4 of our questions in the policy, practice, and research recommendations. We absolutely ask the participants that questions. We ask, what do you believe are gaps in policies for foster youth in college? What do you believe are gaps in services for foster youth in college? What do you believe are gaps in research for foster youth in college? So we had a series of questions that get at what you just wanted to know. And also we ask about what advice would you give administrators, both at the college level, but also just administrators in general about what should be done for foster youth in terms of higher education in the pursuit of that. I would say, I'll take it in a little different direction than Sabrina, only in that I think that what's really important in training in child welfare is folks remembering that these youth who are looking up to them, so as social workers or as independent living ILP coordinators or whatever your title may be, and that the folks who changed my life about moving on and going on to college, because I didn't graduate high school and didn't get my GED until I was in my 20s and didn't start my college education until mid 20s. So just reminding yourselves that every word that comes out of your mouth in support of your, if you want to call it your caseload or your, however you define those young people to you, they are looking up to you. And they're looking up to you to be supportive and saying that they can do it. And no one said those things to me during my actual high school years or in my group home years or my foster care or my social workers. That came from folks who I'll never know who they are and they'll never know the impact they had on my life. So training can be something like those little nuggets that we use to discuss college as an option or to discuss even high school starting there or whatever. But reminding yourselves that they're listening. And so you may not think they are, just as Sabrina was saying, developmentally, you know, they're still adolescents. So they're not going to go, well, thank you so much. That's likely not the response you're going to get. But in fact, they are listening and they want that support.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tony.
Mm-hmm.
So the last question I have in the box right now is, are you looking for more participants?
That's a question that keeps Sabrina and I up at night. Sabrina.
I mean, and she's handed it back to me because we literally just had this conversation the other day about whether or not we continue to gather data. I think we're definitely open to it. And so if you know of someone that might be interested, we definitely want to continue to capture you know, these voices and share. And so if you know of someone that's interested, please send them our way. I think it's important that you know, that we share this information. We collect it and then we share it. So it's hard to say no, you know, to that, Amy. But again, we literally had that conversation. And I'll have to confess, I was sharing with Tony, the study has to end at some point. So yeah, we literally just had this conversation over the weekend. So, but please share if there's someone you think would be interested.
Okay, awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I think we'll stop us there. Thank you so much, Sabrina and Tony, for your presentation today. I'm really looking forward to, as you continue to analyze the data, to see more and more of your findings coming out. And thank you all, everyone, for participating and coming to the webinar today. Just a reminder, we'll be posting the recording as well as the PDF of the PowerPoint on the NRC FAHE website very soon. And please also be sure to register for our upcoming webinars as well. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone. Have a good day.